Hello and welcome to Education in Focus, where today we will be exploring Pupil Premium Plus. Education in Focus is a podcast brought to you by Adoption Focus, and it's a space to delve into all things school and adoption related. My name is Leigh and I'm the training manager at Adoption Focus. The education of our children is a real passion of mine, and so it's a privilege to be joined by our two education experts here at Adoption Focus. Jason, who has a primary background.
Hello, good to be back.
Hi, Jason, and Lisa, who has more of a background in secondary education.
Hello, everyone. Good to be back.
So, just for you listeners, within Education in Focus, we will explore a range of topics and we would really welcome your suggestions, questions, and contributions. So, please feel free to drop us an email at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. Some topics we explore will be specific to adoption and the needs of our children, whilst others will be more generic. We'll never profess to be the experts on every school and every child, but will endeavour to offer different perspectives. So, today we're chatting about Pupil Premium Plus, and I think it's important to say that we are talking mainly about mainstream education, aren't we?
Yeah, because the arrangements in a special setting are going to be a bit different to that. We will probably come on to some of that later, but most of this is around how it affects your children if they're in a mainstream school.
Brilliant. So, what is Pupil Premium Plus?
That's a really good question. So it is different to normal Pupil Premium, which is allocated based on really kind of economic circumstances of a family. So Pupil Premium Plus is an amount of money that is set aside to help children do well at school who have perhaps experienced early life trauma or perhaps have experienced a number of moves. And it's really there to help them with their emotional, social, and educational development. So anything that falls into that category, that's what the money's for. It's currently standing at £2,410 per child per financial year. And it's for children who have been previously looked after, who are currently looked after, or are the children of service personnel. Because it's recognised that this group of children, or these groups of children, have additional challenges. They have additional things that they need help with. And so, in order to help them to become happy, healthy, successful, and to make the progress they deserve to make, they need a little bit of extra help.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lisa. So, do you get Pupil Premium Plus automatically when you have an adopted child?
Well, no, it would seem obvious that you would. If you've got a looked after child, then yes, because it's on a system. However, unless the school is made aware that your child is adopted, then they won't actually get the money, which might seem a bit obvious. But I think most parents do tell their schools. I just wonder if there are any. I've heard of a couple of cases where the schools weren't aware. The parents probably just thought perhaps they didn't need to tell the school. Well, some parents might have felt it wasn't relevant to them at the time, but for whatever reason, their school weren't aware, so it wasn't on the system, and therefore they didn't get that additional funding. So I think it's a shame to miss out. I think I'd advise any parents just to be sure that their school definitely knows.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that the school has to know by the time they do their January census in order to claim it for the next financial
Mm.
year. So, I mean, ideally, let them know at the start of term in September, but if at all possible, prior to January. And it's okay that the school asks for some kind of proof, some kind of evidence. So just showing the adoption certificate is okay. That's not. I know sometimes we're very careful about the information that we do share, but they do need to check that we're not just saying it. So they will ask to see some form of evidence. And then once that's done, you don't need to inform them every single year. It should then remain on record with that school, and you should only really then go on to inform them again if you change schools. So if you move from primary to secondary, or you make a move for another reason.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Is there any guidance about Pupil Premium Plus? Is there anything that Department for Education say, for example, or does it vary school to school? Is there anything specific that can help?
Yeah, there's a lot of guidance out there, isn't there? I mean, Lisa's probably looked at it as well. I mean, the DFE actually has quite clear guidance. I wouldn't always say to people, go on the DFE website. It's a great place. You know, it's a real page turner.
No.
But it is quite clear. I think it's written deliberately in a clear way. So there are some good things, but it does say it's meant to be, or the evidence suggests that it's around. It has the most impact. Let's say if it's around improving the quality of teaching in some form or other. That's quite a broad term. And then it does also mention about social and emotional needs being met, which personally I think those are generally the ones you put at the top, because just from personal experience, most of our children, that's where their needs are. The reason they're not making good progress is often because they have emotional barriers, got developmental delay because of the trauma they've experienced and things like that. So um, personally, I'd put that at the top of the list if it was me, but it is there. It's just not the first thing it says.
I think where the DFE guidance is really helpful is where it says what it shouldn't be used for.
Mm,
So they explicitly state that it shouldn't be used to supplement the general school budget or to support other groups of pupils, such as those with special educational needs or those that are low attaining. And I think that's a really powerful piece of guidance from the DFE that we can use as parents to say, no, this is specifically for our children. It's not ring fence, so it doesn't mean that they have to show that they've spent that amount of money on each child who falls into the Pupil Premium Plus category. It's not ring fence per child, but it does give very clear guidance about what it shouldn't be used for. What's also useful to understand is that schools they can choose how to spend the money, but they must be transparent about that, and they also have to publish on their website a summary of how the money has been spent. So that information is freely available to parents to go and check to see if you agree with, or not, sorry, if you agree with, because by that point the money's already spent, but if you think they are spending it wisely, if you can see that it has been used to have an impact upon your child in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, sometimes what the DFE say you shouldn't do is quite useful for us.
mm.
That could be useful, couldn't it? I guess looking at if you're choosing a school, for example, for your child or your children, I guess it could be useful to look at ways that the school have so far been using the Pupil Premium Plus funding.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Definitely a good point. See if they're being creative with it. Are they personalising the learning for the needs of the children? That would be a really good thing to look out for.
And I think also PAC UK they suggested it's not like a statutory requirement, but they have suggested that when schools publish their analysis of pupil premium spending, it's really good practice to separate out what is pupil premium and what is pupil premium plus spending, because the needs of the two groups of children and the goal of the money is completely different.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so, like you were saying, Lee, if you're looking and considering how they've done this in the past, as like your way of choosing school, it's really good to have those conversations early, isn't it? To say, look, well, you haven't separated the money out so far. Could you please separate it out in future so that we can see the impact of the two pots of money? Let's have a look at what you've done. It's just good to get out there and see what they've done at that very early stage.
yeah. Because one of the creative things that schools do with the standard pupil premium is provide children with opportunities they might otherwise not get. So supplementing clubs, music lessons, swimming lessons, all those sort of things that for financial reasons the families can't provide, but love to be able to do it. Whereas for a lot of our children, lots of parents are doing a lot to overcome those barriers and giving them loads of experiences, but it's in school that they need the extra help. I was looking at actually the funding is going up in April 2023. So if you're listening to this podcast and it's gone past April 2023, they'll be rubbing their hands in glee with getting £2,530 instead of 2,410. So it's a 5% increase. So it's not even as much as inflation, but nothing is at the moment, is it?
No, something's better than nothing, though.
Absolutely, it's going up a little bit more.
Just reflecting back on that question about, what's it for and what does the DFE state? They also state that it's good practice for parents to be consulted about the spending of pupil premium plus money. And I'm not sure, I don't know for certain, but I'm not sure that that same sentence is written in for the standard pupil premium. But pupil premium plus, it is good practice to consult parents and guardians of the spending.
Oh,
So
that's useful.
yeah, they are really clearly signposting the fact that we as adoptive parents should be involved at some level with the spending of that money.
Yeah, and I can see the sense in that, because if there's particular needs your children has and particular ways that they sort of support that they benefit from, then you're the best people to help them with that, aren't you? Because they might not just need more English and maths; they might need something else completely different that's around their emotional development.
And I know we've mentioned in previous podcasts the fact that many of our children mask, so it might be they're presenting well at school and they don't see the issues that we see at home. And so, actually, by having that conversation and open up that line of communication, we can make them aware of some of the wider issues that they're having that they can help support with at school.
Yeah, definitely. I was looking at the figures and thinking, wonder what it would work out as, because sometimes I think from parents they think, oh, this could be quite useful. I can see my child getting lots of support each week. Maybe they get a bit of an additional adult support elsewhere. But the reality is it would pay for about 3 hours a week of a teaching assistant time, typically. That's a rough back of an envelope calculation, which really is not even, I don't know, about half an hour a day, if that, if you work it out like that. So, I mean, it's better than nothing, but makes you wonder what it's a struggle for schools to actually make it have an impact, because it's such a little amount over a year.
Yeah, when you say it as an amount, it's a few £1,000s. You think, gosh, that's brilliant. But actually, when you equate it to staffing costs, it's not going to get you very far. Which is why schools do need to be creative and they do need to think about how they can get the maximum impact for the minimum amount of money, really, to make that money have a meaningful impact.
I think one thing that schools try to do, or could do, I think it's good practice, is when they use that money to support training, because that would have a wider impact. Because what you really want is that, ideally, you want all the staff there to be trauma informed in their practice, so that they're, wherever the child is, in whichever class, whoever they're dealing with, those staff are at least consistently able to empathise and understand what their needs are. So I think that is a really good use of money. And if you've got a couple of children in the school who are eligible for Pupil Premium Plus, then that could go quite a long way to supporting some decent quality training.
It might be a good time to just remind everybody at home that at Adoption Focus we do offer training to schools. So if that is something that you think your children's teachers or key staff members would benefit from, then please do call us and have a chat about it.
And I can say that we offer it for a lot less than the full £2,500 as well. So it wouldn't use up the whole yearly budget just to get Adoption Focus in to talk to the school.
So if we're thinking about, that the guidance says consult with parents, have you guys seen any examples, good examples of Pupil Premium Plus being used in primary or secondary schools that maybe we could take away and use in a consultation with the school?
I think based on my background in secondary education, and especially being a maths teacher and a head of department for maths, the main way that I saw it spent was for one-to-one or small group tuition for maths. And it is a good way of spending that money if the child's need is help with their maths. The Education Endowment Foundation, they have a toolkit that looks at all the different interventions you can do within the school, and it kind of says how useful they are in terms of what they cost and the amount of impact that they have. And they say that it is a really effective intervention and it's very cost effective as well. So that is a good way of spending the money if the child's need is to develop their maths. I haven't seen in my role as a maths teacher or head of department much more creativity in spending the money than that. And that's a real shame because there are so many ways that the money could be spent well. I'm going back to the PAC UK guidance. They have a really good flyer, and I've got the link for it, and we'll send it out with the podcast because they've got a really nice flyer about what Pupil Premium Plus is and really good ideas on how to spend it. And they have really split it into 5 areas. They've suggested that we focus on providing nurture and relationship support, scaffolding children's social skills and peer relations, supporting emotional literacy and emotional regulation, helping children to cope with transitions, and to develop their executive functioning skills. So those are kind of 5 main areas that they believe the Pupil Premium Plus should be focused on. And going back to something that Jason said earlier, if we're meeting those wider needs, those social needs, those emotional needs, then our children's capacity to engage with their learning in school will be better. And then hopefully we will see academic development come from that. So they do come up with a number of different ways that you can focus on those. So it might be having a nurture breakfast club, which allows children to settle into the school day. It might be training midday supervisors to provide some structured play at break times, which is a period of the day that many of our children do find difficult. It could be appointing and training an emotional literacy support assistant, often known as ELSA, having calm zones, funding a member of staff to do meet and greet to help a child who's got severe separation anxiety. But once we start thinking at that level, we can start to think of more creative things than just one-to-one math support. I don't know if you've seen anything different, Jason, in primary schools.
So I think in a primary school, it is a bit easier to be more personalised in this learning, just because the setup is so different with one teacher, probably some support staff around as well who have a sort of good relationship with those children over a long time. So I'm thinking of examples where we had success. Talking to parents actually was a good idea. We had some ideas of things we thought might work. I'm thinking of a couple of children we had at my last school. And we spoke to the parents and said, we're thinking of this. We think it might help. What do you think? Because they had some quite clear ideas of what they felt their child needed too. So it often helped to get that common understanding and agreement, really, that, yeah, we're both working on the same page here and this is in the child's best interest. We're both kind of agreed there. So let's try it. And that was always quite good. We did use an ELSA kind of person to support children one-to-one. Meet and greet was a massive thing, actually. So I wouldn't say that's a small thing. It really made a big difference because the start of the day is so important to those children. And if they do have separation anxiety or they just generally feel anxious about being in a school because it's so busy, it's unpredictable, having that familiar, friendly face who's there at the start of every day just to welcome them in, make them feel calm and immediately settled for the rest of the day, that impact is huge. Going back to lunchtimes, I know you said about midday supervisor training. Now, in personal experience, that's quite a tricky one to crack. We've often, I will say, being completely honest, I've led training for midday supervisors many times, and then you go on the playground a few days later, and you think, oh, well, it's as if we hadn't had that training, really, isn't it? Because it's still, people just sort of stick to the things they've always said and done, and it's very difficult to change people's mindsets sometimes. However, we did start to employ play leaders. That's not my idea. I stole it from another school that was doing something similar, but they were using the Pupil Premium Plus and Pupil Premium to support play leaders who were specifically on the playground at lunchtimes to lead play. And then we tried sports coaches, we tried things like that. And then we employed someone who was already employed, but they had given the responsibility to run a club that was inside. So a sort of nurture, play, games, something that was nice and quiet where children could go who perhaps felt a bit overwhelmed about being on the playground when it's all busy and people chasing each other. And sometimes they struggle with those relationships. And if there's one friend that they particularly want to cling to, but that friend is going off playing somewhere else, they suddenly feel lost and a bit alone. So we tried to pick children that we felt would benefit and invite them to this sort of games club. They could bring a friend with them as well. And it was just a lovely thing. And actually we found that over time, those children were much more settled by going back after lunchtime, and more settled and relaxed and regulated, ready for the rest of the day. Because typically after lunchtime, children come back wired if they've had a bit of a crazy, and there's a teacher, then you're overwhelmed with all these things. Oh, this, and she was horrible to me, and he said this, and they're getting all that stuff, and it can take ages before you can even start teaching because they're dealing with all of the fallouts from the fallouts, if you like. So just having some of these strategies can be helpful, and they're not very expensive, but they can make a difference to those children.
There was just a couple of things I was thinking of there while she was talking, Jason, is first of all, that idea of having something at lunchtime, be it a play leader, having groups and stuff. And that's also going to be helping our children develop friendships and kind of becoming more integrated into the school community. So that's really good. But I was also thinking about the staffing side of it, because we did equate the Pupil Premium Plus to like a teaching assistant and recognizing we're not going to get very far. But there are ways that we can use that money for additional staffing. And along with having something like a play leader or a sports coach, um, actually having a transition worker towards the end of the school year might be a good way to spend that money. If your child is someone who really does struggle with that transition from one year group to the next, then
Mm.
actually having a few hours funded for by the Pupil Premium Plus to have a key person who's just going to answer all their questions, take the time to take them to the next classroom, all of that could be a really good way of using it to alleviate some anxiety. So there are creative ways that we can get more staffing. It's just not necessarily going to be one-to-one support for the entire school week in the classroom. Something I was reading also, which is worrying, but I think it's wise to acknowledge it. Adoption UK have recognised that adopted pupils could be up to 20 times more likely to be excluded. And whilst that's a really quite scary statistic, it does kind of put the need for inclusion at the forefront of our minds, and thinking that that might be a good way to focus some of the spending here. So, maybe we can engage with the schools and start thinking about providing alternatives to detentions and isolation
Mm.
rooms, which, doesn't always work for our children. So that could be a focus. It could be funding an extracurricular activity. I don't know, maybe for a teenager, because it improves their self-esteem, their feelings of self-worth,
Definitely.
therefore enables them to engage better with the school. Maybe putting on drawing and talking therapy. If a child is carrying around an awful lot of anxiety, that could be something that they might benefit from. So, yeah, like I said, it's an incredibly scary statistic, but then it does focus our need on ensuring that our children are included and provision is made for them to help them.
Yeah. One of the questions you might have then as a parent is, what's the first thing go to that the school might suggest it wants to spend the money on? If it's straight away to tuition, English, maths, etc., which your child might need, is that actually priority number one? Because if it's emotional and social, those are the things that over the long term we need to try and help them with, because those are the things that, if they're not right, are going to lead to more exclusions and struggling in school and under the stressful situations that they face. So yeah, I think it's a good point.
I've just had something else pop into my mind as well, because we've spoken about training for staff and how training in attachment and trauma would be useful across the school. But many of our children are accessing support through the Adoption Support Fund, and they may have had an intervention with a practitioner. And we can also use Pupil Premium Plus to pay for that person to come into school and talk to the staff there. So if you've perhaps had some DDP or some TheraPlay or some sensory processing integration therapy, anything at all, if that has been of benefit to your child and you want those messages to kind of like filter out to the wider, like,
Mm.
support network supporting your child, then actually they could use Pupil Premium Plus to have a conversation with that professional and get some learning from that. So it could be very general training on attachment and trauma, or it could be much more specific to an intervention that your child has had through talking to the therapist.
Yeah, you raise a really good point actually, because when you're saying that, I was thinking, that it's quite easy as a school to be thinking, oh, this will be a really good thing to try, interventions and support for a child. But if in total that child's having bits of therapy outside school, interventions here, interventions there, one-to-one talk, it becomes a bit disjointed, and what you do need is something that's consistent. So that probably comes back to what we said before about talking to parents and seeing what the child already has, what needs are being met, how can we complement that in school, so we're not just sort of adding more bits. There's no point having a bit of therapy here and a bit of therapy there. That just completely is counterproductive, because they don't work like that. So yeah, it's a really good point.
It's about having a strategy, isn't it? And making sure that the strategy is joined up. All the support that our child is receiving, wherever it comes from, it needs to be a kind of cohesive strategy and not bitty. And so it goes right back to those early conversations about, yes, my child is adopted. Yes, they have this certain amount of money that they bring into the school. This is my child's needs. How are we going to make this work for them?
Yeah, how can we work together?
Yeah.
Smile. So you're not coming across as confrontational, but you're being assertive, aren't you? Then saying, well, how are we going to make this? We want to make this work, and it's difficult because schools are going to struggle because money is so tight. really is. And they haven't got people they can just pluck out of the air, so it's very hard. And it's about working as best you can, working together. I think is always going to make a better difference. I think one point to mention as well is that often we forget that looked after children and post looked after children may actually be quite academically
Yeah.
able and managing okay. And it's tempting for those children to be sort of left to get on with it, as it were, because they seem to be doing fine. You know, they're meeting their age-rated expectations and so on. But actually, as it does point out in guidance as well, that the money should still be spent supporting them, because actually they should be achieving
More.
greater depth, as they call,
Yeah.
above average sort of standards, and they're not, and so they're still not meeting their potential. So actually, that's a harder one, I think, to fight sometimes, because as a parent, the school might say to you, "Well, they're fine. They're doing really well. They're keeping up. They're doing exactly what they should be." And you may be thinking, I'm convinced, and in fact, I can see that my child actually should be amongst the top performing ones, and that's much harder.
Yeah.
So they could still be having some kind of intervention to support them, to stretch and challenge them a little bit, but that's a bit harder, I think.
And that is really key to go back to that DFE guidance, which said, it shouldn't be used to support other groups of pupils, such as those with special education needs or low attaining. It is about how do we help this particular child, even though money's not ring fence, how do we help them reach their potential? And so we can, I don't want to use the word assume, that's the wrong thing to say, but we are aware that they've had a difficult start in life. We are aware that they have to deal with growing up, but also adding in so much loss, so much grief, so much wondering about their identity. They have to cope with so much more on top of other children. So whilst I don't want to say assume, we can kind of assume that they do need help. And so even if they are doing well academically, they, could they be doing a little bit better? Could they be reaching higher ground? It's
Or are they doing well academically but socially struggling, because they might be achieving very well but they're quite isolated, don't play with many people, sit alone, all that kind of thing, those are massively important for future mental well-being.
If our adopted children have an education, health and care plan, EHCP, can they still get Pupil Premium Plus, or are they then exempt from getting that?
They do, yes, they still get it. I did have to look this up before we did the podcast. I just wanted to know, because it's a good question that was going around my mind as well, because obviously they get significant funding if they've got an EHCP, but they do, and the guidance actually says that it should be there to provide additional items or enhancement. So the EHCP, the funding that you get for that is there to meet the needs as laid out in the EHCP. Therefore, this additional funding that comes in will be to enhance anything that you go, whatever that might mean. So I suppose it's a recognition that in some ways the child might be doubly disadvantaged, because they might have a learning need of some kind or a disability, but having been in care or having had a very difficult start to life, they also are entitled to this extra funding to see if it helps them overcome those other barriers. Clearly those things can be quite linked, because the child might be suffering from a long-term condition, say fetal alcohol syndrome or something, that may have been caused by the early start they had to life. So the EHCP is almost in effect a recognition of the needs that the child has as a result of those sort of difficulties alongside. So yeah, what that enhancement might look like is an interesting one, isn't it? What else could they have? Because the EHCP are quite prescriptive and quite thorough. So I wonder what those things might actually look like.
Have either of you got any other tips for parents in respect of Pupil Premium Plus?
I don't think it's really any more tips. It's just that, just kind of reiterating, it is part of our role and part of our responsibility and our right to be able to go and advocate for our children in this area. And as Jason said earlier, we don't want to go in all guns blazing and be quite confrontational about it, but we are allowed to ask questions and we are allowed to be involved in the discussion, and therefore we should have confidence to go and do that. No one at school is going to know our child as well as we do, and therefore our voices need to be heard. So opening up those lines of communication, being involved in the conversations, giving your suggestions about what would be useful, how you wish the money to be spent, all of that is well within our remit, and we shouldn't be frightened of doing that. It's a good thing. So,
and if you're wondering who to speak to, obviously in a primary school it might be the first place class teacher. It may be the Senko, because the school should have a designated teacher. So if you're not sure, that'll be on their website as well. The designated teacher who is responsible for overseeing the support for children who are looked after and adopted. So maybe worth finding out who that is. Often it will be the Senko anyway, because they often have to double up on responsibilities. But yeah, if you want to know who it is, that's the person to speak to.
Yeah, I'd second that in a secondary school as well. I'd probably go straight to the designated teacher, unless you already have a close relationship with the Senko, and that's a good kind of avenue for you. I'd go straight to the designated teacher, because these decisions are not going to be made at a class teacher level. They're going to be made much higher up, and so therefore getting in at the appropriate level means that your voice will be heard. It's very different having a conversation with a teacher at the end of the school day saying, "Oh yeah, we think that would be good support," and
Mhm.
not an awful lot's going to come from that conversation. So get in, at that higher level. As Jason said, a designated teacher there will be one. They should be on the website. But I'd also feel quite confident enough to just phone at the head and to say, "Oh, I would just like a quick conversation about this." Again, very friendly, very nice. But if you want your voice to be heard and you want to make it clear that you're going to be involved in this, then a quick conversation with them would be okay.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Jason and Lisa. We really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and be sure to look out for others, as well as letting us know if there's something that you'd like us to talk about. You can contact us with your ideas, your questions, or if you fancy joining us on the podcast, just drop us an email at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. Thanks for listening.